Great. So let's see. Should be. Oh. That's interesting. Great. Excuse me. So this is the. What was I about to say? Oh, yeah. This is the film club live stream scheduled for 11 p.m. So I've now turned on the live stream, but we're about 5 minutes to 11. So where I am at anyway. So let's give it a couple more minutes before we can begin. In the meantime, please feel free to let me know if the sound is not good. I have my general hookup with the pin microphone, but sometimes the sound doesn't pick up very well. So if there are any technical issues that you can identify, please feel free to let me know in the live chat. But let's give it another few minutes, and we will be beginning very shortly. So thank you very much for joining, and I hope you're having a very nice day today. It's now here in Tokyo about 10:56 p.m. on the 8th of February 2020. It's Saturday evening, so it's nice to see you. And today the plan is to have a live stream talk about this film, Blood and Black Lace, Mario Bava film. So if you are interested, please feel free to talk about the film in the comment section, or not the comment section, but in the live chat section for those of you who are here live. And for those of you who are watching this as a video, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd be very happy to hear what it is you have to say about this great film. Very interesting film. But let's just give it another few minutes and we will be on our way. So let's see, Jared is here. Hello, my friend. Mike is here from Las Vegas. It's great to see you. And you're, oh gosh, so Jared is early, 5 minutes till 8, so that's very early for you in the morning. Thank you very much for waking up. Thank you. I would assume, I don't know what the time is in Las Vegas for you, Mike, but I'm assuming it's also early, very early. If so, thank you very much. Patrick Doherty, our dear friend, is here. Hello, it's nice to see you. And Mike says, I just finished watching this film for the first time 5 minutes ago. What a stunning film. Yes, yes. I will. One of the things I plan to talk about, somewhat maybe tangentially, but still very relevant, is how this film seems to play upon a first watch, and the kinds of tricks and purposefully made diversions and visual mysteries that it creates, and visual miscues that I think it creates on purpose to lead one down different garden paths, sort of red herrings that appear in the film that end up not being the final conclusion, as you probably guessed. So very interesting stuff. So I will try to talk about that in sort of relation to watching this film for the first time, at least from my perspective anyway. So it'd be I'm very interested to hear, Mike, what you have to say about it, given that you just finished watching it for the first time. A fresh approach and a fresh watch like this from you and from anyone else here who has seen it for the first time is so valuable for me. So please feel free to chime in whenever you feel like it. So, okay, so we have some people here as well. Retro Player 72 is here. Hello. Alteron Kaiju. Hello. It's great to see you. And Patrick says, a wonderful film. Unfortunately, I have to come back to watch the stream later. Not a problem, my friend Patrick. There's no There's nothing that says you have to be here or whatever. Do whatever you need to do. You can come back at any time. You can come back when this is a video, and we can, of course, you can leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section or in the live chat, whatever is convenient for you. Not a problem. Okay, so now it is 11 p.m. in Tokyo. Today is Saturday, February 8th, 2020. Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and it is with great pleasure, and it's a real honor for me that I'm able to say that today it is my pleasure that I will be privileged to have a chance to talk with you about this film, 1964 Italian thriller film or giallo film, which I will get to also. I'll try to get to later in this live stream. The film is Blood and Black Lace. That's the English title. It does have an Italian title, which I will also try to refer to later in this live stream if I have a chance. I think it's quite significant, but let's refer to it by its English title for now, which is Blood and Black Lace. So from the outset, let me say that this is a live stream, and so if you are watching this live as it happens, thank you very much for joining, and it's very nice to see you. If you want to talk about this particular film, you can certainly leave your comments in the live chat, which is ongoing right now. It's open, so please feel free to talk amongst yourselves. Please ask each other questions. Please let us know what you think about this film along the way. Also, if you have any questions for me along the way, please note that I will be very happy to try, to the best of my ability anyway, to address as many of the questions as I can. But please, I ask for your understanding up front, in the sense that I might, by accident, skip over a comment or question. I will try to get to as many of them as possible, but I am fallible and I make mistakes. So, but they aren't on purpose. So if I mistakenly skip over your live stream, live chat comment, I apologize for that. I will try not to do so, but if I happen to do that, please forgive me, but I am doing my best. If you want to leave a comment after the fact, please feel free to leave a comment as a comment to this video, because at the end of the live stream, this will be uploaded to the channel automatically, and it'll become a video for people to be able to watch after the fact. So if by chance I have skipped over a question that you really want some kind of comment from me about, then, and if I'm able to do so, please feel free to leave it as a comment after the fact, and I will do my best to get back to it. Also at the outset, please note, however, that this is a discussion on Blood and Black Lace, and while I don't keep a strong eye, I don't necessarily moderate the live chat, what I will not be doing is I won't necessarily be addressing any questions that are to do with films other than Blood and Black Lace. And so I just ask for your understanding on that. If you want to talk to me about other films, you can, of course, reach me through comment sections in other videos, and maybe reach me privately or something like that. That's perfectly fine. I'm very open to that. But as far as today is concerned, I really want to focus my energy on this film, Blood and Black Lace. So I won't be addressing any comments that have not to do with this film. I hope you understand that, but I just want to keep my attention focused on that. But that doesn't mean that you are, you are of course free, right? You are free to do whatever you want and talk about whatever you want after. If you want to ask me questions about something else entirely, please feel free to do so in another video or somewhere else, and I will be very happy to address that to the best of my ability as soon as possible. I should also say that I am coming at this film not as any kind of serious academic expert in this field. and I am not a direct participant in the production of this film. So I don't have any kind of strong expertise that would provide me with a thorough knowledge base on this film. I'm coming at this as an admirer of this work, and so there are some things that I won't be able to answer because I just don't know the answers to the question. So if there are any viewers out there who are curious to know more about this work and Mario Bava, there are many materials out there that are made available. Many scholarly writings and academic writings are being made about Bava and this period of Italian giallo, horror, thriller cinema and the like. And so which is very encouraging, of course. So there are many resources out there that are available to you. Plus, of course, for those of you who have the Arrow video release as an example, there's a great commentary track by the Bava scholar and legend, right, Tim Lucas. It's just a great commentary track, and I strongly recommend that you check that out. Tim Lucas is a giant, right, in this field. So so that's an example. There's also great documentaries and visual essays on this Arrow set, which really provide a lot of background and great jumping off points for further study of this film if you are so interested. So, and hopefully, some comments that I will try to make, I will try to be as clear as possible. But even I admit so thoroughly and with as much honesty as possible. I don't claim to know absolutely everything about every single aspect of this film, but I will certainly try to address any comments that you may have during the live stream to the best of my abilities. So with that, my friends, let us begin our discussion of Blood and Black Lace by Mario Bava. So how should we begin with this? I think I've been thinking about this a lot over the course of this last week. And I think there are many ways, there are many options and alternative methods by which we can start a discussion of this film. But I think we can start with a brief discussion of what giallo is and how this film seems to figure into that particular genre of film. And then I think we can go from there. I think that will provide a nice foundation from which we can then talk about the mystery whodunit element, the visual manipulation of visual mise-en-scène to reflect the psychological pathology and psychology of the characters, and also the idea of capturing the absurd and the chaotic and creating this nature of chaos on screen that is for visual flair and for suspense, but also it's to further the psychological descriptions and portraits of the particular characters. And there are two particular characters to begin with, and there are other aspects that we can talk about. So, but I'd like to talk about giallo for a minute. And I forgot to say one more thing. Sorry about this. I forgot to say that. Very important. If you have not seen this film, Blood and Black Lace, please turn off this live stream or this video, because I will be talking about specific details of the plot. Specific details, including what happens at the end, etc. So the last thing I want to do is spoil this film for anyone who has not seen it. So if you haven't seen it, then please turn off this live stream. You can always come back at any time after you've finished watching it. And so, but I will be talking about specific details here. So the last thing I want to do is spoil this film, because it's such a rich and rewarding experience upon an initial watch. That becomes even more rich and rewarding upon rewatch. But the initial watch is, I think, a stunning one. So I don't want to spoil that. So if you haven't seen it, please be careful, because I will be talking about specific details. Okay, so if you're still here, then you don't mind me talking about this particular film, Blood and Black Lace, and its details. This is a Italian giallo thriller horror film. And what does that term mean, giallo? I mean, this is a kind of subgenre in the thriller slash horror genre of cinema, and it's specific to Italy. And there are, of course, many antecedents and inspirations taken from literature, and of course this idea of giallo and yellow and mystery whodunit literature in these sort of yellow colored paperbacks and stuff, which then carried over into the film adaptations and also film stories that seem to take cues from these whodunit thrillers of this yellow paperback nature. And so this is where giallo comes from, in a sense, the terminology anyway. But the film style of a giallo film is a very interesting thing. And when we talk about giallo in the context of Blood and Black Lace, I think it becomes very fascinating indeed. So again, this is not meant to be an overview of giallo, but just to set a very basic structure to this discussion. My understanding of what giallo is that it usually involves, this is not always true, but it usually involves a kind of mystery or whodunit. So therefore there is a cast of characters, and there is usually a set of crimes that are taking place. Usually these are killings of some sort, so killing off of characters, much like a whodunit mystery thriller. And then the killer is usually kept secret or mysterious. The identity is not clear until the end. There's usually some kind of detective or detecting by a particular character along the way, and we reach our denouement at the end. So it operates, at least in a very brief descriptive way, at least as I've briefly described it now, it seems to operate as a pretty much straightforward mystery whodunit thriller, right? Well, that's not all. Because what a giallo does that is different from, let's say, a straightforward mystery whodunit thriller, in my opinion, is or a number of things. First, it also focuses much attention and energy on creating a visual and aural landscape, sort of sonic and also visual landscape of cinema, in painting the backdrop that is this meant to be the setting for the narrative, this whodunit narrative. And this kind of presentation of a world that is oftentimes filled with a lot of absurdity, a lot of nonsensical situations, illogical situations. Oftentimes geography could be treated in a way that does not necessarily have any kind of bearing in real life physics, but on the contrary, everything seems to create a kind of warped sense of geography, which therefore creates this innate sense of danger. Because if we have this warped sense of geography combined with a visual tapestry that is meant to create a sense of menace and suspense, what that means is that, in terms of the narrative anyway, the killer can basically pop up from anywhere, as it were, an almost omnipresence that is very powerful and also very suggestive, and also a great generator for suspense. There's also aspects of this giallo genre that are very absurd and illogical. There are leaps of logic that in the narrative oftentimes that really don't make sense, or certain psychological profiles that are created due to certain leaps in logic that oftentimes stretch credulity. But that is part of the point of a giallo, in the sense that the horror and the suspense generated from something that is illogical, something that is irrational, something that is almost inexplicable or unexplainable. It's, I think, itself quite innately disturbing. And that also gives these sorts of films an edge, which is very interesting too, because you'd think on the one hand that a mystery thriller would inherently have to rely on logic as a means of propelling its narrative forward, because you'd have clues that are set up, and clues by their very nature have to operate on a sense of being logical, right? This clue means this, therefore the killer is this person, or that sort of thing. So there's a line of logic in a sort of straightforward mystery thriller. But in the case for a giallo film, not necessarily anyway. And so what that means is that giallos aren't necessarily dealing with trying to set up clues where one can therefore look at everything that has happened and try to solve the mystery along the way, like an Agatha Christie novel. The giallo's concern is not with that, and that's definitely the case for Bava's Blood and Black Lace, that's for sure. In general, there are leaps in logic where this idea of following the breadcrumbs of clues is not necessarily the point of a giallo, but it's the journey towards the goal that is the point of the giallo. And there's this idea of mystery, but not quite knowing where the mystery is going. And every step of the way seems more and more far-reaching and exiting a sense of logic and going towards a more irrational state of being until we reach our climactic denouement, as it were. So it's a gradual digression, if you will, from a state of comfort to a state of extreme discomfort. And so that is, I think, the wonderful melding, if you will, or almost in a positive way, the sort of destruction of certain formulaic aspects of a mystery whodunit thriller. And logic breaks down. The visual style is therefore emphasized in favor of a through line of logic, as it were. So, in other words, things are highlighted on the screen that really don't make sense in real life terms, but that make perfect sense in cinematic, overblown terms. And the same is true oftentimes for the application of music. There is also oftentimes an emphasis on violent death scenes, or sort of cinematically bravura shot scenes of violence towards victims, and these often are considered to be set pieces in many of these films. And so that is not always, but oftentimes these are the case for giallo. They are oftentimes mysteries, but they are punctuated by these oftentimes very graphic scenes of violence that are shot in a way that one can say might be seen as being quite, how should I put it, cinematic, for lack of a better word. And so this is, in essence, what I think good giallo is. And I admit it's a very poor description. If you want a better description of what a giallo film is, I would recommend looking at the supplements, for example, of Blood and Black Lace Arrow video release. Much better way of describing it than I could ever do so. But for purposes of Blood and Black Lace, I bring this up because in many ways, Blood and Black Lace is a quintessential giallo film, at least from this period, the early 1960s, because it has a mystery element to it. Right? It has the mystery element in that there is a very ominously masked killer that is stalking certain women of this fashion house, and we have victims that are some of these women that I will get to in a second at the fashion house, and they are killed. Some killed in very spectacularly violent ways. Quite graphic, but it's not overblown in terms of the seeing all the stuff that happens, if you know what I mean. But a lot of it is left up to one's imagination, but a lot of it isn't. So there's a nice kind of mixture of imagined plus also stuff that is explicitly shown on the screen. So there's that. There's also this idea in the film that is the um, the visual landscape is oftentimes heavily, overly punctuated with color, with unnatural movement. The geography seems to be quite difficult to comprehend. For instance, the inside of the fashion house, right? Haute couture, right? The fashion house. If you think about it, the geography doesn't seem to make sense very much, right? There are some rooms and they go through doors, and characters go through doors, but there are a lot of these curtains that seem to cover the walls in a very disproportional way. They go into a room and suddenly there are walls and there are mannequins randomly set up, and then there are lighting cues that make the geography quite difficult to comprehend, right, from a very purely logical point of view. Also, therefore, the geography is very difficult to grasp, and it seems almost malleable or maneuverable, if you will. The geography is also traversed in terms of how characters are able to move from one place to another in seemingly little time. So, for instance, the killer, right? The killer, he kills the second victim that he kills is Nicole, and this is in the antique shop, right? And then the same night he goes to the apartment, and that's where Peggy is, and with Marco, and then Peggy has the diary, and then she burns the diary, and then the killer barges into the room and then really assaults her, physically assaults her quite violently, and then takes her to another random place, another room that we don't quite know what's going on. So it seems like the killer is able to traverse spaces with relative ease, even though it's the same night, as it were. And this is also true in a very significant way at the very end with one of the final victims, and I'll get to this in a second, Tao Li or Tilde, and how the killers talk about how one other victim needs to be made in order to make the crimes look like they were committed by this person, and then it looks like they want to kill her and then make it so that she seems to have killed herself. And then it suddenly cuts to, and this cuts to a shot of the victim's face drowning in a tub of water. And so there is suddenly an abrupt shift of geographic space that is certainly warped, and that's warped by use of editing. And so the cinematic landscape and the tools of cinema are also used in order to warp the environment, if you will, which thus creates a sense of illogic space, and that illogic space leads to the sense of irrationality, and that irrationality leads, I think, psychologically speaking, in the minds of the viewer, a sense of fear and unease. So we see this, right, in this film, Blood and Black Lace. We also see the idea of mystery element of this film, right? Who is the killer? Kind of followed through, at least at the beginning, with the idea of the inspector character, Inspector Sylvester, or Silvestri, as it were, and following some kind of set of clues, because we see him interrogating certain characters, in particular the male characters of the film. We see him sort of making sense of certain mysteries in the film about Frank or Franco and his addiction to drugs, or talking about Marco, and then deducing that Marco has epilepsy, and there are other things that the inspector does where it seems like he will be solving the mystery, or he's the one who is going to solve the crime of who is killing these women. But in fact, what happens is that the film doesn't necessarily provide any specific clues per se that he discovers that leads him to figure out who did it, right? Who done it. Because in fact, around 2/3 into the film, his character is abruptly dropped from the narrative once the men are let go, and once the police are on the trail of a different thread entirely, because once the men have been apprehended, one of the other women of the fashion house, Greta, is found killed, right, along with the body of Peggy. So I think, right, the Inspector Silvestri character then says we have to start over again and we have to figure out who did it. And then he's never heard from again. And so this idea of the mystery being solved is in fact never solved by any character in this film, right? So that's an interesting thing. So that, I think, lends itself very nicely to a kind of giallo trait, in that there is the semblance of a mystery laid out on the fore. But if we really peel back the layers, we realize that there is no whodunit mystery thread at all. And in fact, it breaks down. It breaks down even further as the film progresses to its conclusion. And by the way, its conclusion about who did it is never revealed to any character in the scope of the film. It's only revealed to us as the viewers of the film. And so we realize the plot, who is killing these people, or which two characters are killing these people, which is, I think, an ingenious thing in terms of the two people who are in cahoots and their plan. And I'll try to get to that later in a second, specifically when I talk about the characters. So my point is that this film seems to gradually, or it starts with a mystery element, but then it gradually overcomes that, and it really leaves that mystery element in the dust in favor of something else entirely. And that something else, my friends, I think is inherent in the visual presentation of the film. The fact that flashes of red and green and flashing lights and moving objects. The very first actual shot of the film after the credits, I believe, is the hanging sign outside during the rainy storm. And then there are things moving around quite erratically and ominously. And sometimes things happen and move that really don't make any sense. There's one shot in particular at the very end where a mannequin is seen moving, and it doesn't make sense at all. So there's also a scene in the antique shop, the very iconic scene where Nicole is being stalked by the killer. And we see her look in the room there, and we see in the distance what looks like the killer, but in fact it looks just like a mannequin or a fake man doll standing there in the light, and then the light flashes, and then we see the mannequin actually disappear in what seems to be a subliminal cut. But it's that sort of thing where things are moving around in a way that is illogical and unnatural. Space is being warped. Colors are being applied in a very unnatural and unsettling way. Music is almost applied in a way that's like an assault on the senses, with that wonderfully bombastic score. And while the mystery is going on, it just disintegrates until it turns into nothing, and the inspector doesn't solve the mystery, at least during the scope of the film. We are given what the information is by the end, and then once we see the end, we see the outcome of what happens. And this is in many ways a chaotic way to tell a mystery thriller, because it doesn't leave any room for clues and that sort of thing. But it does provide us with something else entirely, which is a mystery that is laying down the groundwork for creating something that is completely different, and that is trying to achieve something different, which is unsettle, unnerve, surprise, and confuse. A very general proposition to this conversation. That is why I think this operates as a kind of quintessential giallo film. Try to get into specifics of the film right now, but before I do, let me go to the live chat and see who is here and see what you have to say. A retro player 72 says, my favorite Baba film, suspenseful, clever, and the shots are wonderful. Alan is here. Hello from Yonkers. Hello. Jared says, it's an interesting whodunit. Ayakona 23 says, konnichiwa daisuke. Mark L says, hello from the film. We'll leave my comments under the video. Thank you. Alan says, so happy to be discussing this amazing giallo. And you continue, the grandfather of all, many red herrings, aren't there? So many red herrings, and even the scenes that aren't red herrings feel like red herrings. Oh, I have to talk about this before I continue. So thank you, Alan, for bringing this up. I will get to the live chat. And one of the great things about this film is how shots are and sequences are set up, and you don't quite know what's going. Something quite different, and I think that really also adds a sense of unease and disturbance, and really sets the stage. It also creates a sense of mystery, right? Which is what is going on here? Or they are doing something, and it might seem one way, but we might think we want to be one step ahead of the film. So maybe it really means something else, but in fact, it really meant what it initially seemed to be in the first place. So there are many kinds of twists and turns in terms of how one can interpret certain sequences. For example, when the man is apprehended by the police, if you recall, we go back to the fashion house at night, and Greta and I should say also that I might be, as I talk about the characters, because there's the English version and there's also the Italian version, and sometimes their names are slightly different between the Italian version and the English version. So you might catch me going back and forth. I won't necessarily be, I won't necessarily have fidelity to one version or the other. So I might go back and forth in terms of the characters, but I'll try to be as clear as possible. But there is Contessa Cristina Como, and she is in the fashion house with Greta and with Tauli or Tilde, and if you recall, Greta then goes outside to her car to go back to the house or the villa, and we see Cristina Como in the window in the black silhouette, and then we see the car sort of back into a tree or something, sort of bumps into a tree, which is very significant for the plot, because that means that then when Greta goes back to her home, then she is compelled to go to the trunk and open it and see that it's actually maybe been damaged to the point it's now she's going to open it, and she finds the body of Peggy, right? And so, which leads to another very inexplicable scene as far as what Greta does with the body. But I'll get to that in a minute. But let's go back to the fashion house. If you recall, then we cut to, after we see Greta leave in the car, we go to a shot inside the house, or inside the fashion house on the second floor, where Christina, the Countess or Contessa, right, whose husband had recently died, what seemed to be maybe under somewhat mysterious circumstances, which is very significant to the plot, of course. But she is now alone in this particular room. And this is where three characters die, get killed by this masked killer, right? There's Isabella at the very start of the film, and then Nicole in the antique shop, and then Peggy with the... See now, here's a noise, and then that's sort of... Then we see her face, it seems to be registering maybe fear or some kind of unease or something, to the point that this could be mistaken for upon she feels trepidation and fear, because maybe she thinks that, or maybe we as the audience might think that, oh no, the killer is going to go after her next. Well, of course, nothing could be further from what is actually happening in this film, right? Because we realize by 2/3 of the film that she is in cahoots with Massimo or Max, and the Cameron Mitchell character, and in fact they are the ones who have been behind this in a very interesting way, use of two characters to commit these crimes. To be specific, it was Max from Massimo who killed Isabella, and he also killed Nicole, and he also killed Peggy. But then when he was apprehended by the police, then we have the next victim, Greta, and then Greta was then killed, now we understand, by Christina, excuse me. And so this is a very interesting sequence, right? This is the killer we see alone in this room, and she goes into the next room and she sees the fallen mannequin, she hears the noise, she's frightened and all this stuff. And it's a very ominously set scene. But this is, I think, set up so perfectly to make one believe upon initial watch that maybe she is going to be the next victim. And if so, that really is a nice, well set up red herring in really excellent fashion in many ways. First, for the narrative reason that I've just pointed out, but also in a more interesting way, because if you recall also by the sort of near the end of the film when Max and Christina are together, on the one hand, and I think it's sort of what is implied is that they're smoking a cigarette or something. So it's probably they're having a discussion towards the end of the film, sort of a post-coital discussion, right? And at first, during that discussion, Christina is very much, she is basically enjoying the fact or relishing that these women have died on the one hand, and yet at the same time, excuse me, earlier, prior to that scene, when Massimo has been released from the police and he goes back to the fashion house and he picks up his diary, which is very important, but no one notices that he gives it a very mysterious, shifty-eyed glance. And it's very important because we've seen that diary operate earlier in the film, of course, when the killer is confronting Peggy in the apartment, and instead of talking and giving a voice, he opens the diary book and writes in German. At least in the version that I have, right? In German, he writes, "Where is the diary?" So the red diary. So I'm sorry, I'm using the word diary twice here, but I'm referring to two separate things. I'm referring to the little black book that opens up to a piece of paper that the killer writes, "Where's the diary?" And "Where's the diary?" of course, refers to the other diary, which is the red diary, which is one by Isabella, which is forms a kind of one of the cruxes of the narrative plot. It helps to propel the plot forward, at least to a certain extent. What was I saying? So yes, so we know therefore that Christina has expressed some misgivings about killing. She expresses a lot of discomfort about killing Greta, and even at the end there, when Cameron Mitchell character says, we've got to get one more in order to convince the police that it's the killer has killed himself, or in this case herself, because they want, apparently the idea is, although it's not quite as simple as we are meant to believe it, because it's a little bit more complicated, because we realize that Max is actually doing this to essentially get Christina out of the way. But what the plan is, of course, is that they are going to kill Tao Li, or Tilde, and that's when the film abruptly cuts to the very iconic shot of her face being submerged in the bathtub of water. So, and that, of course, is another murder that is committed again by Christina. So my point is that scene back in the fashion house when she sees Greta leave in the car is a scene of her, and narratively speaking, it's a red herring because it looks like she's going to be a victim, but in fact she is one of the killers. But also the fact that we see her later as this conflicted character, she seems on the one hand to relish the fact that these women have died, but she doesn't want to necessarily go through with the dirty work, so to speak. She expresses a lot of misgivings and discomfort about it. She doesn't want to do it. It makes her uncomfortable. Where does that discomfort lie? Why does she feel that way? Is it because she doesn't want to get her hands dirty? That's why she was maybe using Max to help get her husband out of the way, and also kill all these women, starting with Isabella, who apparently was blackmailing him. So maybe she is, maybe this is an indication that she is a manipulator of other people, of men in her life. But it also could be, as an alternative, an indication of maybe some kind of moral ambiguity in her character, of some kind of discomfort stemming from maybe knowing that she's not committing any good deeds or something like that, or she's committing immoral acts. This is a stretch, and I can't give you any basis in the actual dialogue or the scenes in the film. But what I can do is go back to that scene in the fashion house when she's alone and it looks like she's a victim. If you recall, there is a certain sense of discomfort on her face. Also, the fact that she is scared when she hears the noise and she sees the mannequin fall. I think that also could be seen as being her maybe wits, maybe not necessarily being with her necessarily. And this is very significant too, because this is the moment before she is committed to go after Greta and then killing her at Greta's house, with the way she does, with the suffocation via pillow, right? So this scene, I think, therefore, is very, the fact that she seems to be registering looks on her face that I think upon subsequent reflection could be interpreted to be scenes of maybe ambiguity, not necessarily being fully prepared to do what it is she knows that she has to do, which is commit a murder, commit the killing of Greta. So I love that ambiguity, and when we see the scene the second time, I think it reveals a lot of its truth, and it becomes not a red herring, but in fact it becomes some kind of helpful insight, if you will, into the character of Cristina Como, which is really great. Incidentally, I think it also serves another function in terms of the giallo landscape. If we think of a giallo film like a visual nightmare, in terms of presentation of the environment and the atmosphere that is like a visual nightmare. Things are warped on the screen, and the mise-en-scène is manipulated by the filmmaker to present a kind of outward expression of the absurdity and chaos and nightmarish qualities of what is being told in the story. Then I think also we can say that by extension, we can also look at some of the nightmare landscapes that are depicted in Blood and Black Lace, and we can see them as being perhaps also a reflection of the warped psychology profiles of these particular characters. Remember, if we remember that Cristina Como is one of the conspirators in these crimes, we can assume that and also she apparently had a lot to do, or she was instrumental in what we assume is the death or the killing of her husband, right? Her previous husband, because also we realize that she is now married to Max, which is revealed at the very end, which is also a very significant part of the plot, because that means that Max also wants her out of the way. But going back to the scene in the fashion house, if we remember, or if we can rely on a giallo as also being a visual expression of a nightmare landscape, we can also, by extension, look at a giallo film as a kind of representation of the psychological profile of characters who have who have disturbed personalities. Let me put it that way. And so this sequence could therefore be a kind of, or it could be seen as being almost in a way like really representing the psychological profile, or the psyche, if you will, of Cristina Como at the time. In that case, it's very interesting because she is shocked by the falling of a body, which ends up being a mannequin that's bathed in red, which I think can be interpreted to be maybe the act of killing. So it's almost like the act of killing is almost calling her or waking her out of some kind of hypnotic stare or hypnotic state, if you will. And she's abruptly brought back to the notion that she has to follow through with this. And she's scared by this as well, which is suggestive of the fact that maybe she doesn't really want to do it, which is consistent with what she says to Max later on in the film, as in terms of she doesn't really like to get her hands dirty. And so I think this is also a great example of how the film is also not only presenting a visual nightmare, but also presenting, or potentially anyway, a sort of psychological profile painted in visual, graphic, giallo terms, if you will, on screen, as Mario Bava does it oh so wonderfully. So that's one example of a red herring that operates beautifully in this film. And before I go to the live chat, I should give you another example. One of the things that's really quite an interesting red herring is Greta and what she does with the body of Peggy. Now, if you recall, Greta drives back to the house and at night, and she hit the back of the car against a tree or something, which causes her, when she goes back to the house, to notice a little bit of damage in the back, which then compels her to see that the back is open, or it has been maybe open. She opens it, and then the body falls out, which is a pretty shocking situation. But she does something very curious at that point. She doesn't she doesn't necessarily, she doesn't go and call the police. What does she do? She drags the body into the house before one of the manservants can see that, and she hides it away behind a screen in one of the main rooms, which is a very odd thing. It's incredibly odd, right? Upon first viewing, one could look at this and think maybe she is doing this because she is complicit. Or maybe she is doing this because she thinks that someone that she cares about is complicit, right? And who does she care about? Well, she's seen to be in a relationship. Oh, am I back? I think I got cut off, but I hope I'm back. So sorry about that. That must have been a little bit of a Wi-Fi connection error, but I hope I'm back. And let's see, so what was I saying? So yes, the fact that we see Greta drag off the body and hide it in her house rather than call the police is suggestive of the fact of the possibility that either she killed her or she is in cahoots with someone who killed her. And the person that we know she seems to have a kind of relationship with is Richard, although we also have seen how kind of disappointed she was when she found out that Richard in fact has a lot of IOUs and is up to his neck in debt, as it were, and he doesn't have any money to his name, and that's what's revealed by Franco, right? So we don't quite know what the state of her relationship is with him, but we can assume that they're still close because, or at least I think it's a healthy assumption to make. So my point is that is also a red herring, because why would she do that if she was innocent? She probably thought, therefore, that, and we know that she's not the killer, right? Because she ends up being one of the victims, and we know who the killers are. So that leads to the question, right? When we see that sequence after the fact, we know that she's not the killer. So that also becomes a red herring that turns into something else. And I think that provides another great opportunity for an insight into her character, which we don't really get because we don't spend a lot of time with her. Incidentally, before I get off of the red herring bit, upon initial watch, when we see this shot of Greta dragging the body in, it does lend itself to the possibility that maybe she is the killer, right? And it's possible that we think of that in our minds. And it does link back, if you recall, earlier on in the film, when Nicole is in the fashion house, and this is after this whole thing about the discovery of Isabella's diary and all that. And she is talking on the phone with Franco first. and Franco is on the phone saying, I really need to get some of the stuff. And we understand later that this is probably referring to drugs, right? Illicit drugs. And then she gets off the phone and she goes back to the fashion house. And then she is called back to the phone a second time, and she is talking with what she thinks is Franco, but we understand is in fact the killer, because that person invites her to go to the antique store, and then that's where the place where she ends up being brutally attacked and killed in a very, very disgusting way. But if you recall, who called her to the phone a second time, right? If my memory is not mistaken, it was Greta who called her to the phone. That's not to say that she was immediately or directly complicit in that fake phone call, but it does bring her into some suspicious light, right? Why was it her that called her to the phone call that ended up leading to Nicole's death? Why did, therefore, later Greta drag the body of Peggy into the house, right? So these elements seem to be somewhat, right, suspicious, but they end up being red herrings at all. But, and also, they also look, they also, at least in my eyes, provide a great opportunity, at least in a very brief sense, as to some kind of insight into Greta's character. And we see that perhaps the reason why she was dragging the body into the first place to hide it, maybe it was a sense of panic, but it seems perhaps also possibly that maybe she was doing it because she really earnestly thought that it was Ricardo who was doing this stuff. But we will never know the answer to that, because unfortunately she is killed before she can reveal that information to us, the viewers. But I think there are possibilities of that. Maybe there is feelings of dedication towards Ricardo that really go above and beyond, to the point where she is willing to become an accomplice to murder. That sort of thing. But my point is that these red herrings lend themselves nicely to focuses of or foci of interpretation that lead to potential further insights into specific characters that are really quite magnificent. One more red herring, and I will get to the live chat questions. But the black book that we see the police give back to Max or Massimo after they are going to release all the men from custody. This is very important, right? Because it's given a lot of prominence. It's given a close-up, and it is because it has that ornate design on the front cover. And this is meant for us to recall the same book that was used by the killer when he was trying to get the information about the diary from Peggy, right? And I've mentioned this earlier. Remember that scene when that black book is given back to Massimo by the police, and he's about to be released. It goes to a shot of his face, and he looks quite sort of suspiciously, tries to be nonchalant in putting it back in his pocket or something. But the point is that I think we are meant to see that and assume way of revealing information, right? Because we don't know. Maybe it was something that he recognized was owned by someone else. Maybe it was something that he innocently was suspicious about that had nothing to do with the murder. Maybe it was some other innocent reason for him to be suspicious. So it's not to say that at that particular point it is a done deal that we, the audience, know that Max is complicit in these crimes. We will find that out a little bit later, of course, after that scene. But my point is that even that, which is not even a red herring, it's in fact the truth in the context of this film, of course, that can also be seen as a kind of potential red herring, at least upon first viewing of this film, which I think is a really fascinating way of upending this idea of a murder mystery, really upending the way of presenting information. It's almost playing against our expectations, or playing towards our expectations in a way that I think is almost like three-dimensional chess. It's almost like, at this point in the film, that sort of information, we would think in a traditional murder mystery, they wouldn't give away the identity of the killer this early in the film, right? It's not at the very end. It's still maybe around 2/3 of the way into the film. So there's still some ways to go. They wouldn't give away the identity of the killer now, would they? So it's that kind of thinking that would make one guess something else about that, at least potentially. It's only a little bit later, of course, that we realize that, in fact, he is the killer. So in a way, that's a sort of inverted red herring surprise that I think is quite clever, the more I think about it. Very, very clever. And then, of course, we realize that, yes, indeed, Bava and crew are willing to destroy any expectations that we have that this is a murder mystery. And in fact, by that point, and as the film progresses, we realize that all those rules are out the window and anything's up for grabs. So that makes the film more suspenseful and exciting, in my opinion. But that is another interesting indirect or inverted red herring that I find very, very fascinating. So there's that. I should mention one other thing. I'm so sorry. One other thing before I go to the live chat. Related to that and the way in which information is presented in a way that seems to be somewhat overly obvious. I should also point out earlier in the film, if you recall, there is a scene where the killer goes to the apartment where Peggy is, and the killer writes down in the black notebook in German, and then knocks Peggy out in a very brutal way, and then carries her off, right? So all during the sequence, we see other characters, other male characters, enter the environment, right? So first we see Inspector Silvestri and the police, right? We then also this scene is intercut quite inexplicably almost with the sequence where Franco is going to visit Ricardo and Greta at their home. Because Franco is going there because he says that he just discovered the body of Nicole in the antique. Firstly nervous and in a panic because he doesn't want to be suspected of the killing. And so what he says is he wants to go there to help, and he wants to have a sort of mutual alibi constructed. So it'll be helpful for everyone concerned. This is very curious because then the sequence then cuts back to the sequence where Peggy is tied up in the chair and there's a thing with the hot oven and all that, the masked killer. So it is very clear from the sequence of events that the masked killer, by this point, that masked killer that is attacking Peggy cannot be Inspector Silvestri, it cannot be Franco, and it cannot be Greta, and it cannot be Richard or Ricardo, right? It can't be unless the film is playing with temporal space. If we assume that there is a strict chronological sequence with respect to these intercutting scenes, then we can assume, therefore, that the killer cannot be any of these people, which is very curious. Right, very, very curious way to reveal information. Right, that's almost half of the characters that are really revealed to us, the viewers, to not be involved, at least in the killing of Peggy. Right, so that could be seen as being a little bit of a mistake on the part of how early the filmmakers reveal information, but in a very curiously intriguing way, I think those sequences really work, and they add a sense of almost labyrinthine complexity to the mystery thread element of the film, because it's still active during this early part of the film. And let me explain. This is almost going against expectations, because once again, when we see a mystery thriller, something that is skillfully put together, a mystery thriller usually wouldn't reveal its hand this early in the game. It wouldn't, right? Because as I said, it really essentially reveals that almost half of the characters couldn't have killed Peggy. Okay, so if that wouldn't happen in any other kind of mystery thriller, it wouldn't, right? But it does here. So it's almost like playing with our expectations. It's almost like, on the one hand, Bava is almost saying, this is not your ordinary murder mystery. And it's almost like he is, in a very effective way as a filmmaker and as a great artist, he's almost like taunting us into leaving behind our expectations of a traditional murder mystery thriller. Okay. But even if we were to stick by our expectations that this is going to be a straightforward whodunit, we can look at this and try to be clever and think maybe there's more going on here than meets the eye. And maybe we could assume from this that the film wants us to think that none of these characters has anything to do with Peggy's murder. But that doesn't necessarily mean that none of these characters didn't have anything to do with any of the other murders, right? So maybe there is a conspiracy of more than one killer or something like that. You know, that sort of thing can lead one off, right? If we were to play with certain genre expectations of the whodunit mystery genre or subgenre, which I think is, in a very inverted way, very, very clever. So it can be so on the one hand, it can be seen as maybe being maybe a little bit too stupid, or it can be seen as something very clever, or it could also be seen as the filmmaker making a statement here and saying, in fact, this is not what you think it is. This is something else entirely. I don't care about the conventions of a mystery thriller. I care about creating confusion. And I think that is what's going on here, which therefore means that this is yet another red herring, but it's operating on an almost meta level. And it's much more complicated than I first thought it was. And that's true for many of the other red herrings. They are, on the one hand, seemingly red herrings, but the more I think about them, the more complex and rich they become. And those are examples of why this film, I think, is so rewarding upon rewatch and rewatch and rewatch. It just provides so many mysteries. And so many things that I think are mysterious about the plot and the setting, and also the filmmaking choices. Really quite interesting and very clever. But that is my general take on red herrings in the film. So Alan, thank you very much for reminding me of that. Jared says, Peggy being tortured was quite gruesome. Yes, it was. And very, very much so. Retro Player 72, very unsettling, especially with the close-up of the camera. Jared Wignall says, especially for a film back in 1964. Then again, European films were more violent back then compared to American films at the time. I should also mention that you know, the great Bava scholar Tim Lucas does mention the possibility that there probably, or there is a possibility that some of those scenes might have been cut a little bit. At least that's what he surmises, I think, quite logically. And so if you notice, there might have been other stuff, a little bit of extra stuff. Again, don't hold me to that, but that's what Tim Lucas seems to suggest, at least in terms of a possibility. And so maybe it might have been the fact that there would have been a little bit more to those violent scenes than we ended up seeing, at least with this Arrow release. But again, that's what Tim Lucas says in terms of a possibility. Okay. Let's see. Just skipping around here. Mark L is here. Hello. Too bad Italian cinema lost this diversity of genre. Solitary Ronin Films. Hello, our dear friend. Hi, Daisuke. Finally made a stream. Sorry, I'm not a problem, my friend. Not a problem at all. Yes. And there's a discussion here about Giallo. Solitary Ronin is a great expert. One of my favorite YouTube channels ever. If you haven't checked out Solitary Ronin Films, well done. Let's see, Jared says, the mystery in this film was very interesting. I really wanted to see how it was resolved. Yes, it was very interesting, although, as I tried to suggest, I think there's sort of a more than meets the eye element to it, and also, at the same time, seeming matter, which is very paradoxical and quite brilliant. And let's see, Jared says, the killer's mask reminded me of Rorschach from Watchmen quite a bit. It was very creepy. That's very interesting. So thank you for reminding me of that, which is one of the genre elements of a giallo film is also the presentation of the killer. And there's also this, not in every giallo film, but in many giallo films involving a killer and victims, usually the killer is represented in some kind of plain getup. Here it's like a black raincoat, a leather raincoat of some kind, a long raincoat with a hat and a mask. Now this mask is featureless. It's featureless to the point where it doesn't even have anything. It doesn't have any holes or anything like that. It's completely featureless. It looks almost like maybe very thick, how should I put it, like very thick pantyhose that's put over the head of someone. But it doesn't seem to be that, because there is none of the, how should I put it? I mean, I don't want to get into too much detail about this, about why I think this is not pantyhose. But my point is that it doesn't seem to be anything, the mask doesn't seem to be anything that is taken from reality, right? If it was actually trying to depict actual pantyhose being over the head of someone, I mean, we've seen this in other. You can kind of see through it. You can see the features. They're kind of smushed against the tightness of the thing, but you can kind of see the features of the face underneath, right? Here, we don't get any of that. We kind of get a little bit of the smushed nose or something like that, but it's nothing to the extent where we can actually make out features. It's very featureless on the surface and also underneath. There's nothing given away in terms of the impressions of how the cloth fits onto the head. That's my point. So this doesn't seem to be anything taken from any kind of daily life thing, which is very curious. I mean, why is this mask being made? Who made this mask? It's very also, there are no holes. There's no hole for the mouth, for the nose, nostrils, or for the eyes. Anything like that. So how can this person actually see through this? Well, what's going on, right? So a lot of questions about this mask already. It seems very, very impractical as a tool or getup or garb that one would use and wear in trying to kill someone, right? It seems very, very impractical. And also, it stands out too. It's not like you wear it in order to camouflage oneself. I mean, on the contrary, it stands out quite remarkably. I mean, I only need to point to the very introduction of the killer during the sequence with Isabella at the very beginning, when she's walking from the gates to the house outside in the rain, and we see. It's all dark and everything like that, but the camera goes down to like a reflection of a pool or a lake or a pond or something, and we see the inverted reflection of a figure with this mask walking through it. So we can see the mask in darkness. It's not like it's meant to camouflage or anything like that. So one thinks about it, it has a very impractical effect, of course, in real life terms, right? But we have to remember, this is not real life, right? This is a giallo film. This is a heavily stylized film. And therefore, this is yet another great example of how the giallo uses something and it doesn't rely on reality or perceived reality, but in fact goes for the ultra stylized in order to make a point. Here, the point that's being made is the horrific effect and the truly viscerally frightening effect of seeing this kind of figure emerge from the shadows. It's very disturbing, a very disturbing image, and one that is quite indelible, and it's very, very creepy. It's creepy because it's a very dehumanized look. It's also very creepy because there is this viciousness that is suggested by this look. There's a savagery that's also suggested by this look, and also the way in which the actor carries himself and the real almost agile brutality that is being employed during the death scenes here. So there is a real sense of dehumanization with this particular depiction of this killer, which I think is quite effective. But what adds a sense of complexity to this depiction, which I would suggest, is we don't see the killer as being totally all-powerful, right? Because we see the killer oftentimes struggling. We see the killer oftentimes sort of in a bind. Recall when we see the killer leave the antique shop, and he's having trouble with the car and all that stuff, and he's sort of almost panicking, if you will. And the same is true for when we see the attack on Peggy. There's a sense of panic almost with the killer. So it's not like the killer is this cold-blooded machine. In an interesting, again, paradoxical presentation, on the one hand, he seems very dehumanized. I use the pronoun he. It is actually accurate, at least as far as these particular sequences go, right? But the killer here is presented as being very dehumanized on the one hand, and almost coldly savage, robotic. But he is also shown as being vulnerable in a very odd way, seen a little bit panicking. And so that weird dynamic, I think, is something that I didn't quite know what to think of that when I first saw the film. But the more I think about it, the more I think it is yet another example of putting us off, right? Making us feel uneasy, right? We can't necessarily settle with the understanding that this is a completely dehumanized character, because we also see the character struggle, which is, I think, wonderfully parallel with the fact that the killer is revealed to be not one, but in a sense two people. So that puts us more sort of off balance, if you will. So I think that's yet another way in which Bava's giallo film here, Blood and Black Lace, is really attempting to push us off balance and just give us something that is so far removed from reality, and it also, in a very odd way, so tightly connected to reality. It's very paradoxical, but I think that sense of confusion that's generated means that this is meant to confuse and perplex, and I think it does so in many ways, both in terms of the direct narrative, who is this particular person, but also I think in a maybe almost imperceptible way. But still one that is effective and one that has lingering effects. So there is that. Also, I should point out the interesting fact that recall that we see the killer and his physical attributes at the very outset with the killing of Isabel, which is very it's very violent in terms of the struggle against the tree, and that it's quite disturbing. And of course, we see the physical attributes with Nicole and the antique shop, and of course that stuff happens with the claw, and also we see the physical attributes with Peggy, and also a very, very brutal sequence. It's very difficult for me to watch that sequence, in fact. And we get, of course, another red herring with the maid wearing a very similar black leather coat. It's amazing how many, of all the black leather coats in this film, they have to be worn either by the killer or by the maid. Right? It's very interesting. But recall, though, that when we see the killer confront Greta, we never get any close-ups, or not close, we never get any full shots of the killer's physical presence. We only get a shot of the killer poking out of the back of the screen after the body of Peggy has fallen over, right, in a surprise. But we never see a full body shot of the killer. And we never get a shot of the killer actually doing the really horrible deed at the end there against Greta. That is very significant, right? It can be seen perhaps as being a way to economize, because all up to now we have seen the killer act in a very aggressive manner physically on screen, and now it's just a way to abbreviate that, because why repeat something we've seen over and over again, right? So it could be seen as that, but in fact, my friends, there's a practical reason for this, right? And this is my assumption, of course. I assume that this is a practical reason. There's a practical reason for this, in that, of course, the killer with Greta is not Max or Massimo. It's in fact the Contessa. So if we saw the Contessa, right, and it's there is a physical difference between the Contessa Max or Massimo, when we see them together, I mean, obviously they are a different body type. So unless there was some kind of body shape to the actual coat itself, but there doesn't seem to be any indication of that in the film. Of course, it would, if we saw the full body of the killer during that sequence with Greta, then it might have been very clear that this is not the same person that we had seen in the previous kill sequences. So I think that is my assumption is that that's the practical reason why we never saw any full body shot of that, which is very, very clever. Very clever. It's something, that aspect of that. But thank you very much for your comment, Jared. Okay, let's see. Mark L says, genre was new to me, didn't like it, although it was interesting visually. Well, that's fair enough. It's fair enough. You know, this film isn't for everyone. And there are some moments that I think are quite disturbing. And I know this is not your suggestion, Mark, so I don't want you to think that I'm reading this into your comment necessarily. So, but there are many reasons for not liking this film or any other giallo film of a similar nature. It's because of the violence, and also because of the violence towards women, right? Because all of the victims, or all the people who die, except for one at the very end, all the people who die are women, right? And in fact, the Italian title is, please forgive me for my poor Italian pronunciation, but the Italian title is Sei Donna per l'Assassino, which can be translated into English as 6 women for the assassin, or 6 women for the murderer, or 6 women for the killer, or something like that. So in the title, in the original Italian, I mean, we get what, I mean, it says what it is right on the tin, right, so to speak, which is we get 6 victims that are women, right? So, I mean, if we want to count with Isabella, Nicole, Peggy, and Greta, and then Tilda or Tali, that's 5. And then we have the very end, the final 2, which is Massimo and the Contessa. So we understand that the Contessa died from her wounds, which we understood were inflicted upon her fall from the ledge after she was trying to escape, when she thought the police were trying to break into the house after she had just killed Tilda or Tali. So that, we understand later, was caused by Max or Massimo cutting the reinforcement of that thing that caused it to fall. But he didn't count on something being there to break her fall, of course, but still it wasn't enough, because right, so although it's a very interesting thing, you know. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting way ahead of myself, but my point is that the Italian title does say that there will be 6 women, and we can assume these are 6 women who will die in the film, and in fact we do have 6 women who die in the film, the 6th being the Contessa herself. But we also have another person who dies, which is Max or Massimo, at the hands of the Contessa, which we assume to be her gun going off, right? So, what was I saying? So yes, so there is violence towards women in this film, and if we disregard what happens to Massimo at the very end, because in fact he is the person who is behind these killings, all the victims are women, right? So and Tim Lucas goes into this very well. You know, there's this idea that is this film kind of misogynist because of this depiction of violence against women? And that is a very, I think, a very reasonable question to bring up. Very, very reasonable. And I don't have any clear answer for that because I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. But I do want to say a few things about it. First of all, Tim Lucas, in his commentary, brings this up, and he has some astute comments to make. I leave it up to you whether or not you would agree with that or not. But just to synthesize what he said in the commentary, he mentions the fact that his understanding of Bava and his personality and his career and the way he treated women on set, for example. There's a particular interesting story about how he was very much concerned about a certain situation that happened on set regarding the character Peggy and stuff. So check out the commentary for some more information on that. It's really quite fascinating. But one of the reasons Tim Lucas cites as being reasons why he thinks that this film is not necessarily as misogynist as some might claim it is because of Bava himself. Okay, so that's one thing. And the other thing is that he also points to the fact that this is a world of fashion that is being depicted in this film. And he also says something about, well, if you want to point to this film as being misogynistic, then we also have to acknowledge the fact that the fashion world and the fashion industry writ large also has it's one way to potentially look at the world is it has a misogynistic streak about it in terms of what one might call the depiction of models and how that kind of depiction is made on a very highly commercialized level, or that sort of thing. So whether or not I buy that argument necessarily is still something that I'm not quite sure of. I think it's a very sound argument on the one hand, but at the other hand, it does seem to maybe deflect from the film itself, right? It's sort of saying, well, this isn't bad because there are other things that are worse. That's the thing. Well, it doesn't necessarily answer the question as to this film. I think it's a sound argument on the one hand, but it doesn't necessarily. It's as an ancillary argument, but as a primary argument, I'm not sure if it operates that well. I haven't made up my mind yet about it, but I have not made up my mind. But I haven't fully thought it through yet, but. My hunch is that it doesn't necessarily serve as a good primary argument as well as it does a good ancillary argument. But another thing that he points out, which I think is very interesting as well, is that if you recall, in the film, there is talk by Inspector Silvestri and there is discussion about the possibility that the killer is what's the phrase? It's a sort of a sexually depraved killer, or he's killing these beautiful women because of some kind of warped sexual desire or something like that. And that's the discussion that's occurring in the film, of course. Whereas if we think about what actually is going on, it would seem that nothing is farther from the truth, right? Because the reason why these people are being killed, or at least the first victim anyway, was because of blackmail. And then later on it was because of the diary. And then later on it was to solidify an alibi. And then later on it was to what seemed to be a plot to try to evade suspicion by casting it elsewhere. But it was also a plot by to try to get rid of one of the accomplices. So there's all this stuff that the reasoning behind it is not at all to do with some kind of depravity in sexual terms, right? So the fact that the film deals with this might suggest that, or not deals with, the fact that the characters talk about the possibility that the killer is of this kind of this way, right, might be itself suggestive that yes, the killer therefore is killing women and only women. Right. But the narrative is suggesting that these victims are being killed not because they are women necessarily, but because they are doing certain things. Right. Isabella is killed not because she's a woman, but because she's a blackmailer. Right. And Nicole is killed not because she is a woman, but because of the diary. The same is true for Peggy. Right. And Greta is killed not because she is a woman, but because the contestant needs to create an alibi. For Matilda is killed not because she's a woman, but because because Max convinces Contessa that, or Christina, that she needs to be killed in order to convince the authorities that she was the one who killed everyone, and then she committed suicide later or something like that. But it was in fact Max's plot to try to get Christina out of the way. Okay. So, right, so if we think about that, then these are victims that are, and then, I'm sorry, at the very end, Contessa well, he tries to kill her at first, and she ends up dying, of course, because we end up, we understand that they were in fact married, and that she is very wealthy, and so we understand maybe Max's whole plan was to get at her wealth, and that's what she suggests at the very end there. So if we think about it, right, they aren't victimized because of their gender. Okay, at least in the context of the narrative, the pure narrative focus of the film. That doesn't, of course, mean necessarily that the film is off the hook, so to speak, because we can look at the sequences themselves. The sequences are quite violent towards these victims, but they also, there is also a very obvious eroticizing of the victims, right? Because, for instance, I think the famous one is maybe Nicole and Peggy, right? Especially Nicole in the auction, not auction, that's the antique store. She's running around there, and then there's a point where her dress is ripped, and it's revealing her she's wearing her brassiere or something. So it's and she's revealing her it's not, I don't think it's any kind of direct scenes or shots of nudity necessarily, but it is a shot of her being stalked and being in this state of partial undress. And the same is true for Isabella. I think Tim Lucas makes a really interesting observation about how when the killer drags the body away, we see the skirt uplifted. I mean, we don't, it's again not a direct shot of nudity per se, but it's a reveal of sort of underwear underneath. And so whether that was on purpose or not, but the camera does linger, not in close-up of course, but it does linger on the shot, so it's not like it's out of view from the camera. And there are other examples like this. I mean, Tilda, or Tauli's death in the bathtub is another example. She's killed, she's wearing nothing but kind of maybe underwear or negligee or something. And then when we see her upturned in the water, we can actually see, I mean, by this point, it's a very tragic shot, and Tim Lucas makes point of how tragic this looks. She looks so vulnerable like that. It's very, very sad, actually. It's a very sad shot, and we see her inert, dead body, and then we can see a slight glimpse of nudity in the sense that her body is in the bathtub, and she's still wearing a brassiere, but we can kind of see through it by this point. But the point is not, but I would suggest that is not in any way a kind of sexualization of the body necessarily, because this is also the same shot where the body is, I mean, one way to look at this shot, as Tim Lucas suggests, is that this is a very sad thing, what's happened to this poor character at this point. Also, this is the shot in the water where we see the blood trickle through the water, so to speak. So the shot of the nudity that I was referring to isn't lingered upon. It's actually a very, you have to kind of look for it, as so to speak. So it's not the focus of the shot, I would assert. So so on the one hand, there seems to be a kind of eroticizing or sexualization going on, but and whether that is in any way misogynistic, I think it's really up to the judgment of the viewers. And if one reaches that conclusion, then one reaches that conclusion. I mean, that's one of the things about art, right? It's subject to interpretation, and sometimes its ambiguities might lead to well, not good interpretation, but sometimes its ambiguities might lead to certain interpretations by some, and yet other interpretations by others. And so I don't know if there's any one right answer to that particular issue. Be that as it may, I do for me, it's still a kind of an open question, but I do see at least the narrative, anyway, the narrative to be on the side of it not being misogynistic. Although there is a little bit of ambiguity, if you recall, with Cameron Mitchell's performance. Oh, it's a great performance, by the way, when he is in the basement or that hidden chamber with the secret door. He goes down there, and then the Contessa comes down as well, and then he says, I'm paraphrasing. I apologize if I don't get the exact line right. But he's going through the ashes, I think, and he's got that little rod, I think he's holding, and as he holds it, he's saying, "Oh, the police think it's the work of a sex maniac," or something like that, right? As we said in the narrative, nothing can be further from the truth in terms of the narrative, anyway. But the way he delivers that line is actually quite interesting. I think there's room to read a little bit of ambiguity. I'm not saying that he had a kind of motive, of a sexual motive behind the killings. Although he does say that line in a way that might make one think that there might be the possibility that perhaps there was more to the killing than just the narrative suggestions. Okay, let me put it that way. So I would urge you to look at the film again and see the way he delivers that line. It's a great example, by the way, of how great Cameron Mitchell's performance is. Really, really great. Yes, so there is that. Incidentally, before I go back to the live chat, I should point out that the Arrow Blu-ray that I have has this 18 certificate, because this is a UK Blu-ray. This Blu-ray that happens to be region A and region B, so I had no problem playing this on my player here. But it does have this 18 certificate because this is the UK release. On the back, it has the brief description of the 18 certificate, which it says the reason why this is given an 18 certificate. And what it says here, it says on the bottom, it says suitable only for persons of 18 years and over, not to be supplied to any person below that age. Okay. And it says contains strong gory violence and sexualized nudity. Okay. Sexualized nudity. So I mean, is this referring to the shots of Nicole in the antique shop, right? Because, I mean, there are moments of her being in a state of partial undress, that's for sure. But I don't know if I would go so far to call it sexualized nudity. Is it referring to the shot I was describing earlier about Tilda or Towley? But if so, I wouldn't call that. I would call that nudity, but I wouldn't call it sexualized nudity, because I actually would assert that it's far from being sexualized. So I find this description very curious, in fact, and I admit to not quite knowing what this means. Of course, the word nudity could have a very broad meaning. And if that's the case, then maybe it's referring perhaps as an example, as a specific example, to the shot of Nicole in the antique shop that I was referring to earlier. But again, I'm not quite sure. There is no further description about this. But anyway, that's the state of things. So. Okay, so going back to, and thank you very much for that initial comment, Mark L. And believe me, once again, I don't want to suggest that you were saying anything beyond what you're saying, which was you didn't like it, but it was very interesting visually. So, I don't want to read more into your comment than what was actually written, but I do want to say that it led me to a discussion of other things. So thank you very much, Mark L, for that very much. Okay, so let's see. It's now what? Oh gosh, it's already 12:35. So we've been at this for an hour and 35 minutes. Time flies. So let me go to the chat, because I don't think I've been attentive to the chat as much as I should. So okay, let's see here. Just going through here. If I've skipped your comment, I apologize. Pete 1972 is here. Hello, it's nice to see you. Okay. Solitary Ronin Films was discussing about colors and use of colors and the vast use of colors Red elements as well. Yes, there's a red element. There's a telephone at the end, the telephone that's swinging, or the receiver end that's swinging in the air there. That I think mirrors the very opening shot of the swinging red sign. And the like, and I think there's a nice description that Tim Lucas gives about this red and its sort of importance, or its appearances in Italian cinema. I think it's very interesting. Let's see. All right, just keep going here. Mike says, the fashion house was such a beautiful set piece. I'll have the image of those wonderfully bizarre mannequins in my head for weeks. Yes, and as I was suggesting, the fashion house itself has a very confusing architecture and a confusing layout. I still don't know how the geography works in this film. It makes no sense to me. And I think that's the brilliant thing about this. It absolutely makes no sense. Also, the way the curtains are used and drapes, I don't quite know how that makes for confusion. I don't quite know how the rooms operate, and also their secret chambers and all that stuff is really quite fascinating. So, and the mannequins, yes, that leads me to another great detail which I forgot to mention, which was, if you recall, at the end of the film, when Christina has fallen from the building there, and we go back to the fashion house, and we see Max alone in his office, and he's trying to open this box or something with what we assume to be jewels or something like that. Okay. Before this, immediately prior to this glimpse of him, we see the camera move around the dark space of one of the rooms in the fashion house. It moves around to the point that we actually see one of the mannequins move, or one of the sort of the not wire dolls move. I don't think it's a mannequin, but it's one of those wire things that has the shape of a person that's used for clothing preparation or something like that. It moves. There's no one there on screen, but the camera moves, and then suddenly something on the screen's right sort of jiggles, right? And it's one of these figurines that jiggles. It's very curious, right? Because if we think about how that sequence plays out, we then go to the inside of the office of Massimo, and then Massimo goes out of his office through the door into that room where you were before with the jiggling mannequin figure. And then we go back into the office where he goes and sees that the inside of the box are now gone, and he sees the secret chamber door open, and then who emerges from the door? But it's the Contessa, badly injured, but she's still alive. This is very curious, right? Because if we think about how that scene plays out and how the geography plays out, it is very difficult to come to the conclusion, in my opinion anyway, that the original moving shot that led to the jiggling of the figure, which we assume maybe was someone touching it, it's very difficult for me to come to the conclusion, therefore, that that is a POV shot of Christine, or the Contessa, because it doesn't make sense the way that she ends up in the sequence, right? She ends up on the other side. So how could she be on this side when Massimo came through and he didn't see her, and then she ended up on the other side, right? So it doesn't make sense that would, in my eyes anyway, that would be her POV. Coming back to the fashion house. If that's the case, then why did the camera move, and why did that thing? It seemed like the camera hit something and it just knocked it slightly off balance. Why did it move? There could be a number of possibilities. One, it could be another character that just had a random POV shot, and we never know who that character was. Okay, or it could be that even the camera is a character. And even the camera has a role to play in the creation and formation and the overall conclusions of this world and this story and these characters. And this is by extension, right, the omnipresence of Mario Bava. It's almost like his camera, the roaming eye, if you will, the omnipresent manipulator of the film and the cinemascape, is a kind of character all to its own. I mean, we've seen the great camera work and the way in which things move around. Ubaldo Terzano, right, the cinematographer, and so the way the camera moves is so poetic and so filled with a lot of flourish, of course. But here is where the camera seems to collide with the world of the film itself. This is such a wonderful thing. If we assume that it's not the POV of the Contessa, it could be, but I don't think it could be, actually. You can think otherwise, of course. If it's the POV of the Contessa, I think that could make sense. And it also ties in to an earlier shot we saw inside Greta's house just before she is killed. Remember, she's in another room, and then she hears, she's in the bedroom, and then she hears from the main room downstairs the sound of the harp. We assume that it was the killer, maybe almost beckoning her and calling her to come down. And I think that's a fair assumption to make. But it's a mirror shot, or it's a mirror moment that mirrors this last camera movement that I was just describing. And it's almost in the same part of the frame too, in the right part of the frame. So it's almost like we see the camera or something off camera manipulating something on screen. Now, whether it's the killer or Contessa or POV or the camera itself, by extension, the filmmaker himself. If that's the case, then I think this is a great metaphor for the operation of the filmmaker and his own gloves, if you will, that he uses to sort of form the clay that is the film, and then he creates the chaos. And he's creating chaos already, because this is quite a confusing moment of the film. Why is this in the film to begin with? It almost feels like a mistake, but it's I think lays the groundwork for a nice discussion into a grander metaphor, potentially anyway, to the act of the filmmaker in this world of giallo itself. And so I find this yet another example, right, and tied to how I was trying to describe giallo earlier, which is it's almost like an over-stylization. I don't want to say form over substance, but it's like the murder mystery whodunit element is disintegrating in favor of an over-stylized element of light, color, camera movement. And why does that happen? Because of the choice of the filmmakers. And if it's the choice of the filmmakers, then it's the active choice making of the filmmakers that leads to these decisions that ends up being the film itself. And if that's the case, and that movement of the camera that knocks the model, the figurine off its balance a little bit, is, I think, a perfect metaphor for that. And its inclusion in this film is so bold, and yet another example of something that is a kind of mystery of the film that doesn't get easily solved even after multiple viewings. Well done with this, my friends. Well done. I really love this moment. It's really great. So, okay. So let's see. Just going back to the live chat here. So, and I'm sorry. I always do this. Before I go to live chat, one last thing. This is the last thing, I promise. But the mannequin, the use of the mannequins with the close-ups and everything, right? And I was trying to suggest very early on in this live stream, there's that scene with the Contessa by herself in the fashion house after Greta's driven off. And she hears the mannequin. Well, she hears a noise which we understand to be the mannequin falling over in the other room. At least that's what I think it's supposed to mean. And we see also mannequins all about in the opening sequence, the opening titles for the Italian version of the film. And so, with that great score, by the way, Carlo Ristichetti's great score. What that music is, I love that sort of hip, almost beatnik style jazz score. It's quite lush and very seductive, almost a seductive jazz score that operates like a symphony of death. It's really quite wonderful. But that is played over the opening credits, right? And we see the mannequins, and we see the actors standing in almost like mannequins. And so I love that visual image, because it's like the actors themselves are meant to be these mannequins, and they are manipulated in a way to serve the function of the narrative and the filmmakers. And I love that connection as well. And also that there's a nice connection between character and mannequin, as we saw with the Christina character when she's by herself in the fashion house, when she hears the mannequin fall over. And if my reading of that is accurate, in the sense that it could be read to mean that particular environment is an expression of her own psychology, then it's like the mannequin falling is an indication of some decision that she must make, which could be linked to what eventually she does in the following scene with Greta. So I like this link between the human characters and the mannequins. And also, of course, as a very visual flourish, it adds a sense of eeriness and mystery, and we see figures moving about. Of course, what was I saying? Going back to the idea of links between humans and mannequins, I think the ultimate expression of that, my friends, is in the antique store, right? When we see Nicole looking in the distance, I mentioned this before, and we see what looks like the hooded the hooded killer. It's a it's this unnatural pose, because we see it light, and it's not like it goes into dark and then it disappears, but it goes into dark and it's light again. We still see it standing, and it just cuts abruptly, and it just disappears abruptly. Again, it's a subliminal edit, but that's another great example of linking the human character with a mannequin character, right? The killer with what looks like a stand-in mannequin. And also the fact that the killer has this blank mask on, looks like a mannequin in a very interesting sort of way. So, but it's a different kind of mannequin. So, in the sense that this is not a passive one, but this is one that is very active and is doing things to move the plot forward, namely killing certain people as the film goes on. So there's this interesting interplay. Let's see. Okay, so going back here. Emantul is here. Hello, my friend. I hope you're well. And I've just skipped, so I'll go back to the, let's see here. Sorry about that. I've just skipped the, okay, here we go. There's a discussion of M. It's interesting. Gray Rainbow's here. Hello. I hope you're well, my friend. Let's see. Solitary Rodent Film says, Bob obviously like The Archers. Jared says, I noticed the mannequin moving at the end as well. Yes, the film is quite unsettling for sure. Richard Albert is here. Hello. It's nice to see you. Trey is here. Hello, Trey Edwards. Nice to see you. The DP does a great job of lighting Blood and Black Lace. Yes, the cinematography is by Ubaldo Terzano. And so, let's see. Mr. Sirigus, hello. I've never seen a Giallo film. Please forgive me. Not a problem at all. You don't have to see a Giallo film. Not a problem. But let's see here. Okay. Okay, let's see. Yes, and then Mark L says, Baba was DP on film, not credited. Yes, so what's his name? Tim Lucas talks about this and the camera work and many of the decisions done here by Bava, which is quite remarkable. There's one story that he talks about the camera moving through a fashion house and the use of a kind of a wagon. I think it's a wagon to use that. And so, yes, so the camera work, right, should be credited also to Bava as well. So that's very good correction. Not correction, but that's a good supplement to this information, Markel. Thank you very much for that. Let's see here. Internet is acting up, so there's that. Let's see. Okay. There are lags, but it's all good. Malachite says, I think the only Bava film I've seen is Danger Diabolic. Yes, that film is going to be, that's going to be, right, that's going to get us, what is it, a new Blu-ray release, I think. Okay, there's a discussion here of Bava, which is great. Pete 1972 says the film has one of, if not the best usage of color in film. Every time you watch it, you will still be astounded by the color and photography. Let's see. Okay. All right. Here's just discussion more of Bava. JR62, hello, Desuke. Oh no, I forgot to watch Blood and Black Lace. See you all later. See you. I hope you enjoy. Please feel free to leave a comment later, JR62. If you can. I'd love to hear what it is I have to say. Well, give me 1 second here. Okay, there we go. And let's see here. Let's see. Mark L says items on Black Book are fleur-de-lis. Thank you very much. Yes, the ornate design on the Black Book to indicate that it's the same Black Book that was used in the sequence with Peggy. Yes. Trey says, on her dragging the body, this is with Greta, I was thinking it was a panic to hide it from the guy bringing the tea. I was thinking that maybe Tony, or the girl with short hair, was the killer. Oh, okay, that's an interesting reading of that scene. That's very interesting. Let's see. Skull Salad is here. It's great to see you. Daisuke, it's great to see you too. Thank you very much for joining. Let's see. Okay, Alteron Kaiju says, my battery is dying. Thank you for joining. It's nice to see you. I hope you're well, my friend. Talk to you again very soon. And Mike Eli says, the first time the killer was shown, I was reminded of the title character in Darkman. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. That's interesting. Let's see. Pete 1972 says, the weapon that the killer uses very much reminds me of the Freddy Krueger's claws. That's interesting too, but the weapon I think you're referring to is the one that antique, you know, like knight's armor glove or something like that, or something. I don't know what the actual technical term is, but it has, I think, 3 spikes on it. And there's that, and that's used against Nicole in a very gruesome way. I mean, I say gruesome, we don't actually see anything. We hear the sound effects, and we see the quick flash of it, but we don't ever see anything in terms of an actual penetration of skin or anything like that. So it's, while we see something, we don't see something, if you know what I mean. So there's an interesting way in which violence is presented. The same is true, I think, also for the other gruesome death in this film, that of Peggy, but it's shot in a very similar way. But my point is that I think that weapon was used only for that particular scene, right? There were another, and it's interesting too, because how should I put it? I mean, I kind of feel a little bit, it's a little bit awkward talking about this because it's kind of gruesome subject, but I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I should point out also that, right, the way in which the murders were committed with, when we know that it was Max or Massimo who was the killer, right, because he assaulted or strangled, well, not, I don't know if it was strangled, but it had to do with the tree there with Isabella. It was very gruesome. But then there was the stuff with the glove and the hot oven with the other 2 victims, right? But with Contessa, it had to do with smothering or drowning. with Greta or Tilda or Tel Lee. So there was a kind of different way, an approach to the actual killing itself. And that could also be an indication of the kind of psychological profiles of these two characters that we are dealing with here. This is to say that perhaps there is a real, almost a sadistic edge to Max or Massimo. And there is, in fact, maybe something that is not to the level of that kind of extreme sadism with respect to the Contessa, although I can't quite be sure of that. I don't want to read too much into that, but it's just another detail that emerges upon rewatch of the film. So that is very much something to consider, I think. And again, something to consider at the very least in trying to decipher what it is driving these characters to begin with. So let's see here. Mark Elsa has just noted 5 victims on the DVD cover, supposed to be 6. Oh, sei donna per l'assassino. So I think, yes, the 6th is supposed to be the Contessa, I think. Gray Rainbow, hello. So you say it's interesting that the person and persona are derived from the Latin for mask. The current difference shows the blurred lines between reality and fiction. Person, maskless, persona, masked. Wow, that's interesting. Okay, so, so interesting. The current difference shows the blurred lines between reality and fiction. Reality and fiction, interesting. Person, maskless, persona, mask. That's interesting. Although, even, interesting. Reality and fiction. The blurred lines between reality and fiction. I probably would say, I'm not sure about blurred lines, simply because, in the context of this film anyway, simply because it seems like there is such a departure from reality in how this world is being depicted, especially by the end there. But I think this is very interesting, and what I just said might actually be totally off, and I might be completely misunderstanding what it is you're saying. This was very interesting. Let me think about this some more. Thank you so much for this. Gray Rainbow, as always. Thank you. Mark L says, for me, it was just a murderer, not a woman murderer. Yes. Yes, Mike says, Daisuke, I'm glad you mentioned this. I knew the basic premise of the plot going into the film, and I was so pleased to see that the models weren't the typical vapid airheads one would expect to see. That's an interesting point. I didn't quite talk about this, but yes, the characterizations are really good. They're really, really good because, I didn't even talk about a lot about the male characters. I mean, the male characters here are also quite complex in many ways. There's the Marquis, there's Richard, right? There's also Franco with the drug habit problem. There's also there's Franco, the drug habit problem. There's Marco, who's I think has he's obviously he thinks he's in love with Peggy, and he has epilepsy, which according to Tim Lucas was something at the time to be sort of ashamed of, or to be something that was it was common to want to hide. At least there was a kind of societal way to look down on this, and so. That explains why that aspect of his character was a mystery that was to be revealed around the middle of the film, of course, during the time when all the men are rounded up by the police. And there's also César, as well, and who's described by, who has a very interesting background as an actor, and Tim Lucas describes him quite effectively in his commentary, of course. Right, then there's of course the inspector, and there are also secondary characters, and there's the inspector Sylvester, who seems to be a little bit, I don't know if inept is the right word, but he seems to be, I mean, all of his choices end up being, I mean, if you think about them, they're not really good choices, because, right, his two main choices are that he makes are he decides to round up all the men, which actually leads to the killers having to kill another person, and then it throws them off the scent completely. And then some other details happen, which then leads to the second choice, which is Silvestri decides that they are on the wrong trail completely, and they go on a different direction. They are never seen again in the film, and so that's a very interesting way to depict that character, the character who we would naturally think to be the Sherlock Holmes of the piece, or the Hercule Poirot of the piece, but he ends up not being any of those. He disappears before, and he's not there for the denouement, and he doesn't even solve the mystery. So that's a very interesting way to depict it. But the female characters here are quite fascinating. Nicole, on the one hand, I mean, we don't get a lot of characterizations for Isabella, of course, but we do get some characterizations for Nicole, and especially how she is feeling about Franco. And we also get Peggy, and we get a little bit of insight into her. And also, I love how it's, right, because she was living with, she is the one who is seen as being the most visibly emotionally affected when they find Isabella's body, right? And which is very interesting. I think I have that right. And then there's Greta, who is also very interesting because she is living with the Marquis, and Tim Lucas brings up this point, which I didn't realize. It wasn't clear to me until I heard the commentary about it, which they aren't married, right? The Greta and the Marquis aren't married, and so that is, Tim Lucas suggests that this is also something that was at the time potentially seen as being, very risque, and so that is, I think, kind of an indication of how this kind of character is being depicted. Very fascinating. Then there's Tilda, or Tal Lee, and she has this kind of streak of independence, if you will, that also leads to her ultimate vulnerability, and the way that Tim Lucas describes is sad, and quite a sad depiction, or way that she ends up at the end, of course. And then there's the Countess, or Contessa, who is very complicated. And she's filled with a lot of mysteries and secrets, as we know, and as we discover by the film's denouement. But this is a kind of a wonderful cast of characters. And I mean, maybe one might say, for instance, that Nicole might, I don't know if vapid is the correct word, but maybe she seemed to be a little bit too much of into Franco. I mean, at the very start of the film, what does she do? She runs out into the rain without an umbrella, and she talks to Franco in the rain outside by a tree. I don't know. I don't know. If I were her, at the very least, I would have had an umbrella. But oh well. It's probably more effective as an opening shot to see someone running around in the rain without an umbrella. But such is life, such is the cinema, right? So, but still, she does have a kind of sense of devotion, or she does have a sense of caring, and even when she picks up the diary, there doesn't necessarily there's not the sense of there being kind of a conniving nature about it. It's more of a, oh, look what I've got sort of thing. But even with that, what does she do? She still cares enough about Franco that she's willing to leave the fashion show in mid-show to go to see him, which ultimately leads to her demise, of course. But that is a very interesting choice as well. I think what might work against the film in the sense of how these characters are presented is maybe some of the English dialogue. I would admit that some of the English dialogue seems at times to be a little bit, how should I put it, a little bit maybe not dry, but a little bit stilted. Is that the right word? It seems to be somewhat unnatural in places. Not all places, but somewhat unnatural. But that, I think, is not the fault of the performances. It's more, and it's not true of every character, but there is this feeling of maybe the characters, maybe it might make the characters look a little bit stupid, or maybe make them look a little bit stupider than they are. But even if someone were to think that, or even if one could interpret it that way, I would actually say also that even the sort of stilted way in which some of the English dialogue is presented also adds to the sense of unease and the sense of what do you call it? Unnatural unease, right? I'm using the word unease many times here, but my point is that even the way that some of the dialogue is presented gives a sense that this is not reality, but this is some kind of odd, weird feeling, vibe of an environment that could therefore lend itself, that could be another element to reading films like this and other giallo films as being nightmarish or being off kilter or off center or off balance or something not quite right. There's something quite, not disturbing, but it's just a little bit weird. And I think that gives the film an overall effect, which serves the film quite well in a certain point of view. So there we go. So let's see. All right, here we go. Just going here. Youthless One, what a great comment. I remember someone making the case that Bava directs like a cinematographer and not like a writer, so he constantly sacrifices spatial realism for aesthetics, which lends his movies that eerie feeling. That's a great point, and I would also add, he also seems, at least in the context of Blood and Black Lace, he also seems to throw narrative, not maybe throw it out the window, maybe that's too strong a way to describe it, but he's certainly more concerned with the visual elements than he is with the narrative elements, at least in terms of following the narrative elements through to the end, if this were a traditional whodunit mystery. So I agree with, that's a great way of putting it, Youthless One. Really great. Yeah, that's really great. You know, and he's also known in terms of how he manipulates the visual image. I mean, not just in this film, and not just in the films that he's directed, but in films that other directors have directed. He is known as a great visual manipulator, and I mean that in a very positive way, as a true artist. You know, I should also point out, though, that Cameron Mitchell, the actor, right, who plays Max or Massimo. There's a great supplement here that's focusing on Cameron Mitchell and a long interview with him. But also Tim Lucas describes Cameron Mitchell in the commentary, and how Cameron Mitchell had such a high regard for Mario Bava, the filmmaker, as an artist, supreme artist, and he felt that he should have been, or he should be, considered in the same pantheon of great directors as you know, as Fellini and others, because he's, according to Cameron Mitchell, he's really that good. And I really cannot, I really agree with that. It's quite a great assessment of a great artist. He made genre films, yes, but his genre films really are, Blood and Black Lace included, of course, are examples, supremely fine examples of cinema in terms of presentations of nightmares and the depictions of chaos, visual chaos, distilled to their very essences. When we talk about color and sound and movement and gliding and music and everything of that nature coming together. And it's a mark of a great film when, after you've seen it, you want to see it again. And even if you've seen it again, you don't know what's going on because the film doesn't yield its secrets very easily. And even if you try to work with it, it still doesn't make sense. But I mean that in a positive way. And this is a great example of that. And I think that's a great reason, among many other reasons, why what Cameron Mitchell is reported to have said, according to Tim Lucas's great audio commentary, is something that it really should be considered by as many people in the film fan community as possible. In other words, the consideration of Mario Bava as a truly great artist of Italian cinema and world cinema and cinema in general. Really, really much. I really believe that. Let's see. Alan says, okay, he's talking about Blood and Black Lace. You have a steelbook. That's great. Agent 420. Hello. Hello, Agent 420. Let's see. And there's a discussion here about Italian cinema. Let's see. Okay. Oh, Mark L says musical score Mambo. Yeah, that's another great way to put it, Mambo. Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I don't know if I should mention this. It's kind of, well, I'm actually not embarrassed, but it's something I never talk about on this channel. But when I don't do it anymore, but when I was very young, not young, but when I maybe about how many years ago was it? Maybe, oh gosh, maybe I'm 40 now, so maybe about 15 years ago or so. I was living not in Tokyo, but I was living in another part of Japan at the time, and I was still single. I wasn't married. I didn't have a family yet. I was living by myself, and I was trying out different things, and I was. At the time, I was very much into fitness and exercise and also weightlifting. And I still am to a certain degree. I like to go to the gym as much as possible. But I was really into that in my 20s. And I was also trying to get into many other things, different like fitness things and exercises and the like. And one of the things I actually got into for a little bit, I didn't take that many lessons, and it was very beginner level, but I took ballroom dance lessons, and I took them rather regularly. And I still have my shoes, my practice shoes that I used for those lessons. I haven't worn them in whatever it is, 15 years or so. I haven't taken those lessons. But there was about a year period in my 20s where I was doing this quite constantly. And I was going to lessons, not a lot, but maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks or something like that. It was a lot of fun, and it was great. But the reason why I bring it up is because, in fact, it was interesting. The music that was used one time for like a practice or a class, I forget exactly, or maybe one segment of the class, was a different recording, but it was the theme music for Blood and Black Lace. And I never recalled that until some time later, and I was watching Blood and Black Lace, and I was like, I know this music. This is the music that I was dancing to in one of the classes that I was taking on ballroom dancing. This is very interesting. So yeah, it has a kind of mambo type of feel to it. You kind of want to, when you're watching it in your living room or something, you kind of want to stand up and kind of do a little, I don't know, like a cha-cha-cha or something like that. It's an interesting thing. But again, it's also a kind of jazz symphony of death. But it's very, very catchy. So Yeah, yeah. Maybe one of these days, if I ever get back into ballroom dancing, I don't think I will, but if ever I get back into ballroom dancing, maybe one of the first things I should do is to gather around some friends and invite people to a ballroom dance, and I play nothing but giallo film music. So that might be an interesting ballroom dance party. Who knows what will happen in the future. Okay, so let's see. Samuel S. is here. Hello, it's nice to see you. And let's see, just again, if I'm skipping around your comment, I apologize. And I've skipped you. If I haven't called you out, I haven't given you a shout out for being in the live chat, I also apologize. I'm trying to get as many people as possible here. Paul is here. Hello. Eric is here. Eric Navarro is here. Hello. Paul Emery and Eric Navarro is here. And let's see. There's more discussion here of favorite Bava, which is really great. There's also, I mean, I said I wouldn't talk about other films other than Blood and Black Lace, but I should also mention, I think that there are so many close links between Blood and Black Lace on the one hand and Bay of Blood on the other. I think there's so many links to that, but that maybe we'll leave that for another day and we'll go from there. But yeah, oh gosh, that's talk about another great film, but we'll leave that for another day. Let's see. So I think that brings me to the end of the chat, and I look at the clock, and it's now almost 20 minutes after 1 a.m. So that, by my count, that means I've been talking for about 2 hours and 20 minutes. Okay, so not like, as I say, I don't have the strength and fortitude like our dear friends, for instance, Damn Fool Idealistic Crusader, the great YouTube channel, who goes for marathon sessions of live streaming, sometimes upwards of 4 to 5 hours, I think, which is incredible. I don't have that stamina, unfortunately, and I admit that I'm feeling a little bit sleepy. So I will probably start to wind down. Okay, but Gray Rainbow, okay, I'm glad you came back here. Let's see. Gray Rainbow says, Dice Game, my statement was general, so about the person and persona, not a specific reference to the film. Thank you very much for the clarification. Yeah, maybe I was too quick. I immediately went to a connection of the film, but maybe I should have taken more time with that, so I apologize. Thank you very much for the clarification. My point is how much reality and fiction share. That I can see crystal clear. Even in real life, a person may have personas, especially in our contemporary world. Well said, and thank you very much for clarifying for me and clearing up my confusion. Well said. Let's see here. Yeah, Mark L says, dance lessons, shall we dance? So yeah, the dance lessons that I was referring to are not dissimilar to the kinds of dance lessons we saw in the film Shall We Dance, in the kind of dances that were taught and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, one of the times, not every time, but one of the times it was the theme to Blood and Black Lace. Oh yeah, Mike Eli says, I left the Blu-ray menu screen on during the live stream. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, so I've had that music playing for the last 2 hours. I think I've had enough of it. Yeah, it goes in a loop, right? And it's the menu screen is the title sequence, right? And it's just and has the listing of the chapters and scene access and special features or something like that, and on the bottom left corner or something. And yeah, it just goes for a loop, and unfortunately, right, the loop is not that long. It feels like it's not even a minute. Maybe it's maybe 30 seconds. I don't know. Maybe I'm just guessing, but it's not like a full 4-minute sequence of a song, so it's not like there is variety within that 4-minute sequence. It's a much shorter sequence, and it's just a straight through of the theme, and then just ends and it goes back into the theme again. So yeah, it's not like playing an album. It's just playing the same like short segmented theme over and over again. Yeah, 2 hours is a lot. Yeah. Alan says, I hope we can do a discussion of Bava's Planet of the Vampires. I hope so too. That's one of my favorites. I don't know. I haven't spoken about Bava on this channel. This is the first time I've spoken about Bava. I've always wanted to. I went for Dario Argento simply because I just was able to put together those videos or the video discussions about that in a way that I was comfortable with at the time. But I'd always thought about wanting to do something similar with Mario Bava, at least as far as even a limited look at his at a certain selection of his filmography would be better than nothing. So, Planet of the Vampires. Who knows? One day, well, that might be great, but we'll see. We'll see if it's possible. Then yeah, let's do it. I mean, that's the problem, though. Of course, is that there's so many films, so little time, right? But yeah, great suggestion, Alan. And in fact, we should ask, right, Alan, I should point out that I think it was you who suggested a giallo to begin with. So we really must thank you very much, Alan, for your suggestion, and others who suggested giallo. But I was encouraged by Blood and Black Lace, your comment to pick Blood and Black Lace. You know, I really have to say that with live streams and the film club live stream chats, you know, I admit to trying to choose films with a certain degree of care. And one of those things that I always consider is, I mean, is this a film that is something that enough people would be comfortable in watching? And I understand that that's a very subjective and maybe even a dangerous way of thinking about art, but I do also appreciate that not every film is for everyone, and a film like this also has the potential of maybe turning off a number of viewers. And I think it's a reasonable approach to this film because of the subject matter and the way the violence is depicted and that sort of thing. So this isn't something that I would expect everyone who watches videos on this particular YouTube channel to go out and watch and really love or something like that. So, but my point is that I'm trying to be as open as possible with my selection of films for the live streams. And I treat it slightly differently. I have a different way of looking at how I choose films for the live streams versus films that I choose to talk about in videos that I upload on YouTube without a live stream. Maybe it's a distinction that is not really even a distinction. Maybe it's just a random, arbitrary thing that I just happen to impose. But somehow I always think the live streams tend or should be revolving around films that have a kind of as much of a broad appeal as possible. And the reason, especially during the early days of the live stream, and that was because I wanted to be as inviting as possible to as many people as possible. And so if you pick a film that is maybe a very, in terms of content, a very difficult film, then there is the possibility that is not the case. And so, but that could be something, I admit that that's something that is very difficult for me to figure out. And, you know, I mean, I'd love to be able to talk about, and also there's also the idea of live chats. And so there's a kind of unpredictability when it comes to talking live from my point of view. And so I always want to, I guess my point is that I don't know what would happen in a live chat. And so I always want to feel like I can talk about a film and not really feel like I need to worry about um, anything else besides the discussion of the film. And, and for the longest time, I always, maybe it was maybe arbitrary on my part, but I always wanted to avoid talking about a horror film, a really intense horror film, for instance, on a live stream, simply because I wanted to be as sort of open as possible. But that is to say as well also that I'm a big fan of horror and genre films, as some of you may know already. I'm a very, very big fan. I enjoy them very much. And I also realize that these kinds of films deserve the same kind of treatment that I would treat any other film. And so along the way, I realized that my thinking, as far as trying to choose films with broad appeal, as I described it earlier, I think my thinking was flawed. And so I am trying to, therefore, in a sense, broaden the appeal by picking films of different genres. And one of the forays, the first forays into horror and thriller, is Blood and Black Lace for me. And so this is something that I've always wanted to talk about. And but this live stream has afforded me with one of the great opportunities to be able to share with you just a few thoughts that I have about this film. Nothing groundbreaking. There's nothing very academically scholar about anything I've said. But it's just something that I wanted to share because it's a film that I really find almost like a Rubik's Cube of a puzzle in many, many facets of the film, not just in terms of its story, but also in its making and the choices behind how information is presented, as I tried to allude to in this live stream. But the point is that I've seen this film so many times now that, and every time I really don't quite know what's going on. And I think that's great. That's really great. And so I just wanted the opportunity to be able to share that with you and to share a Mario Bava film with you at long last. I think it's something that has been late, but better late than never, I suppose. So this has been a very great, how should I put it? From my point of view, this has been very great for me, because it's allowed me the opportunity to talk about this film, and really, I really want to suggest that a film like this is so deserving of as much critical appraisal as possible. Not, I mean, as a giallo film, as a thriller, and as a horror film, of course, but more than that, or other than that. Not more than that. That makes the horror genre sound like inferior. And so I don't believe that. I really believe that this kind of genre film does have the potential also for being a film that is highly critically appraised and has social significance and merit, despite its genre trappings, as it were. Even discussions about how it might be detrimental to certain, maybe to the way it treats women or something like that, or negative aspects of this film, I think are very valuable, and they really highlight certain modes of thinking and also ways of viewing, and also how certain things and works of art and expressions are real expressions of what we're thinking, or they are metaphors of what we're thinking, or they are counter to what we're thinking. And if whatever the case may be, those are truly valuable discussions to have. And the fact that, for me, this film, I think, holds a lot of potential for great discussions, just based on the comments that I've received from the live chat alone, is yet another signifier of how great this film is, and how great I think it should be considered, and by extension, how great I think the filmmaker Mario Bava is, in terms of his place in genre film history, and also in terms of his place in cinema writ large. So I want to thank you very much for affording me this opportunity and for letting me hear your thoughts about this intriguing, difficult, and stylish work that is Blood and Black Lace, or as I would say in my very, very poorly pronounced Italian, Se Donna per l'Assassino, by the one and only Mario Bava. Thank you very much. So let me go to the live chat for some final wrap-up comments and go from there. Pete 1972 says, I heard that Arrow Video no longer has the rights to the Bava films. I have heard that as well. The rights were given to another company. Don't know which company it was. Yes, so I don't know what the situation is with the Bava films, but I have heard this as well. The reason why I don't know is because I don't go into the Arrow store anymore and look for the Bava films because I already have them. And so I don't actively search them out, and so I don't necessarily get any notifications when something falls out of print and stuff. So I don't know what the situation is, but I have heard anecdotally that this film and other Bava films fell out of print when by the end of 2019. So that means, as I've also heard anecdotally, for instance, the Mario Bava box set that was released by Arrow Video is out of print. And if that is true, then I also heard that it's also very difficult to get. I'm not sure how true that is, but because I have the films, but I have them individually, and so. And for reasons I can get into maybe in another video, I don't have any interest in the box set, but I was very fortunate to get my hands on the releases themselves, yeah. But I don't know what the status is OOP through any direct evidence that I might have. But again, anecdotally. Yeah, I have heard the same thing, so I'm not sure if they're still available through the Arrow shop. Maybe there's still some supply left. I don't know. You'd have to check the Arrow shop directly. So my point is, just check the Arrow shop directly and just check Amazon UK or something like that before going to the eBay route, because there's always the possibility of there being some stock left that's new and that's not overly priced on the used market. So just double check that before going into any used market sales. Let's see here. Oh yes, but then the other implication of your comment, Pete, is what you say in the follow-up, which is maybe because of that news, Blood and Black Lace might be able to get a 4K scan, which would be spectacular beyond belief. Yes. I mean, of course, that this doesn't mean this holds the possibility of these films being released by another label, right? So anything is possible, I suppose. Let's see. Alan says, completely agree with your approach to live stream film content. Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you. You do it very well, in my opinion. Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you. Thank you. David Griffin says, though I don't know much about the horror genre, I have enjoyed this live stream and have learned a few things from all the voices involved here. Thank you, David. That's very, very kind of you. And thank you to all of the voices in the live stream, all of you who participated and who left behind comments here. Really, really great. Mark L., also wonderful. Thank you so much. Film club is a great idea. It helps a lot if we can see the film just before the streaming or if it's fresh in our mind. I agree. Alan says, it feels to me like this first foray into horror live feed went very well, and you are much too modest towards your ability to speak academically to these films. Thank you very much, but I am not an academic, so it's... but I guess I am a fan. I am a big fan of these films. And it's so funny because I always like to focus on like on those little, well, not details necessarily, but it's like with this film. I, like right, why, like I still can't get it, I can't get around, like the why would the film cut from the killer going to Peggy's apartment, and then the killer taking Peggy away, and then cut to Franco and Ricardo and Greta in that house talking about, oh, Franco found Nicole's body, and we need to make an alibi or something, and then cuts to Peggy and the whole thing with the oven, right, or the hot grill or whatever that is. That makes no sense, right? That makes no sense. But that's what I love about this film, and that's an example of why I love talking about this, because it also helps me to better articulate my confusion. And maybe in being able to better articulate my confusion, I might, in some hope, perhaps, I might be able to clear up that confusion. So there is a little bit of a means to an end, as it were, in trying to clear up some kind of mysteries or issues that I have, that I have with a certain film. But yeah, but oftentimes the mysteries still remain mysteries. But still, it's a nice exercise for me as well, to try to work out what I've always felt in my heart, or maybe felt in my head, but was never able to articulate out in words until I was given this great opportunity in a video or a live stream, and be able to articulate it, and to have people listen and respond to that, which is a great thing from my point of view. Really great. I'm so honored to be able to be in this position. Let's see. So Gray Rainbow says, I'm glad to have seen you well and expertly discuss this film. Well done. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Again, I'm a great fan of this film, and there are many great experts. If you want an expert discussion of this film, and if you're interested, you got to check out the anything by Tim Lucas. The audio commentary or anything if you can find by Tim Lucas at a reasonable price, let me put it that way. It's well worth checking out. But at the very least, the audio commentary is great, and also the documentary here. What's the documentary called? It's called Psychoanalysis on this documentary. It's about an hour. Really great. Really great documentary. And also there's a great supplement, I think I mentioned this in an earlier video, an audio recording about Lamberto Bava and also Dario Argento at maybe a screening or a convention, I forget which exactly, but it was an audio commentary of them talking about Mario Bava. And Dario Argento, for example, was talking about Bava almost primarily in the context of Bava's his collaboration with Bava on the film Inferno, but still very interesting to hear techniques and Bava's work ethic and the like from Dario Argento. So really great. And let's see, Ze Moderno, hello, it's nice to see you. How are you? I'm good, and how are you? I hope you're well, my friend. Which Giallo films would you put on the same level? Oh gosh, I don't know. That might, I need more time for that. I tend to go on and I ramble, and so maybe that might be like another, I don't know, hour or 2 hour discussion. I'm not sure, but oh gosh, let me get back to you. But if if I say that, I don't know. If I say that, I don't know. Maybe I can't promise the video would be up at all. So, gosh, what would be some examples of other Giallo films on the same level? Oh gosh, I really can't say. I mean, the easiest. Again, why did I say the word easiest? That sounds that's a terrible way of putting it. But perhaps the one of the most striking examples of a Giallo film that is legendary and perhaps can be said to be of the same degree of legendary status as a film like Blood and Black Lace is perhaps the film Deep Red, Profondo Rosso by Dario Argento. That is in many ways the supreme giallo film. Yeah, that is in many ways yeah, one of the great masterworks. I have spoken about that film in a very early video on this channel. I mean, I look at that video. I saw that video again because I received someone mentioned it to me in a private message. In fact, not recently, but maybe 3 or 4 months ago, perhaps last year. And I saw it, not it entirely, but I saw it again just a little bit because I needed to watch it to remind myself of what I said in order to be able to respond to this particular person. And I looked at it again. I think, oh gosh, I think my comments need much cleaning up. I think if I were to make that video on Deep Red again, I think my comments would more or less be the same, except I would perhaps express a few things, quite a few things, a little bit differently. Well, that might be interesting to do Deep Red as a live stream. I don't know, but anyway, I'm very sorry I can't give you a more complete list. But I would suggest if you're looking for another legendary giallo film, Deep Red by Dario Argento from 1975. I want to say, is that right? 1975. Please, someone correct me if I'm wrong. And let's see here. So Trey has had a great time on my first film club. Thank you for doing it. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. So let's see here. So 24 watching now, and good. All right. So my friends, thank you very much. And Alan is in with one more comment. The bird with the crystal plumage. That's also a great one. Okay, so my friends, I think I will wrap up for now. So I want to say thank you very much for your time and your comments and your input. And if you have any more comments you would like to share, please feel free to leave a comment behind in this video once it has been uploaded, which will be immediately after, or a little bit of time, or almost immediately after this live stream is over. And as you can probably tell from the way my speech is a little bit slurred, I am getting a little bit groggy and sleepiness is setting in. So I will be seeing you again next time. I will make a formal announcement about this, but it's now the 8th of February, now the 9th of February, in fact, where I am in Tokyo. And the poll that I held for the next live stream for you to decide is now closed. And the film will be the anime film Akira. So Akira will be the next live stream film discussion. And so you can join me. I think it's going to be 2 weeks from today. I'll check the schedule and get back to you on that. But I think it's going to be 2 weeks from today. So again, Saturday, 11 p.m. Tokyo time, the film will be Akira. And so I'll be making some more preliminary comments about that later. I'll let you know specifics about that, what to expect. Just a little bit of a heads up, I will be focusing my energy almost primarily on the Japanese language version of that film. I do know it's the English dubs, but I will be focusing on the Japanese language version of the film because that's the version that I know the best. So there are some slight differences, but I don't think I mean, if you want to watch the English language version for purposes of watching the film and wanting to join in on the live stream, that's fine. I don't think anything I plan to say will be anything that's strictly tied to the Japanese version, the English language version, but just for your information if you are interested. So there's that. So, and there's actually something else I do want to say about that poll. Because there are some other films on that poll that I think are really worth discussion. So again, I haven't decided anything yet, but just between you and me, there's a slight possibility, or more than slight, in fact, that the top winner being Akira will be the next film discussed, but also the films that came after that. I do want to discuss those as well. So what is that? There's the Koreeda film, and there's Tetsuo, the Iron Man. But Tetsuo is actually a little bit of an interesting thing because, as some of you know, Arrow, the great people at Arrow, in the North American market anyway, will release a new box set of Tsukamoto films, included in which will be the film Tetsuo the Iron Man. This is, I believe, is going to be scheduled to be released at the end of April 2020, so that's still a little bit of time away from now. So I don't know if it's worth it to talk about Tetsuo now or talk about Tetsuo around the time that that box set is released, for example. Even though the film is, I understand, still readily available on, let's say, a Blu-ray in a UK release, for example. So I think is it Third Window, I think? Please correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, I haven't decided about that yet, but I am thinking that perhaps it might be possible to talk about some of those other films besides the one that got the most votes, Akira, because I think there is enough interest out there to want to talk about some of those other films, but we shall see. We shall see. So, anyway, my friends, I will give you more of a heads up and more detailed information later on this week or next week. But in the meantime, please note that the film that we will be discussing next is Akira. So thank you very much for your time, and until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. If you have any recommendations, please feel free to let me know at any time. And so until we meet again, thank you and cheers. Thank you very much, my friends. All right. So thank you. That was a lot of fun. Thank you to all who joined and participated. It was really great. And I hope you have a great rest of your day wherever you are. Or if you're about to go to sleep like I am, I hope you have a nice sleep. You have a nice good rest, and wake up tomorrow and hopefully watch a lot of movies. Or your day is about to start, or your day has already started and you're going to watch some movies after this. If so, I hope you have a great time. So anyway, my friends, take care and bye-bye. Take care. See you again.